Hey everyone, and welcome back to another week of What's for Dinner, where I share with you some of the meals that I've made for my family throughout the week. I make these videos in hopes that it will give you some new dinner ideas and inspiration. Today I am back with 4 more easy, delicious, and budget-friendly crockpot meals. You're not going to want to miss it, so keep on watching. This first meal is a creamy tomato basil chicken. This was extremely easy to make and very delicious. So to start off, I'm adding some diced tomatoes to my slow cooker. This is a can of diced tomatoes with Italian herbs. The recipe actually calls for a 14-ounce can. This is a 27-ounce can, so I'm only using about half. Now to that, I'm adding 3/4 cup of tomato sauce. Then I'm going to grab a bowl and whisk together 3/4 cup of heavy cream with 2 tablespoons of cornstarch, and this is just going to help thicken up the sauce. Now I'm going to dump this right inside my slow cooker and give it a quick mix. The next thing to go in is 2 teaspoons of minced garlic, followed by 1 teaspoon of salt, half a teaspoon of basil, and 1/4 teaspoon of black pepper. And then the last thing I'm adding is 2 tablespoons of chopped fresh basil. I'm going to mix this well, and then I'm going to add in my chicken breast, making sure to press them down into the sauce and flipping them around so that they are completely coated. And here I'm adding 4 boneless, skinless chicken breasts. Now I'm going to cover it and cook it on low for 3 to 5 hours until I reach an internal temperature of 165 degrees. The cook time does vary depending on which slow cooker you're using. Some do cook faster than others, especially the newer ones, so just be sure to check up on it. So my chicken was done after 4 hours and it was extremely tender. I decided to serve this with some fettuccine, so what I did was I scooped out the chicken and kept a little bit of the sauce to put on top, and then I stirred about half a cup of freshly grated Parmesan cheese into the sauce. Then I went ahead and dumped in my pasta. I gave it a good toss, and then I was ready to serve. I served this with a side of steamed broccoli and added some fresh basil on top, and it was delicious. You can even add some of the Parmesan cheese on top of the chicken for some extra flavor. The chicken was extremely tender, melt in your mouth tender. I don't think I've ever had chicken in the crock pot this tender before. What's important is that you don't overcook the chicken, so like I said before, be sure to check up on it. If you don't have a meat thermometer, then I highly suggest that you get one. It makes a huge difference. So this was really good. We really enjoyed this one. Now on to the next meal. This next one I think was my favorite. It was so good. I am making some smothered pork chops. So to start off, I'm adding half a cup of ketchup into a bowl, and I'm going to whisk this with 1 tablespoon of Worcestershire sauce and a half a cup of chicken broth. I'm also adding 1 tablespoon of brown sugar, followed by 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1.5 teaspoon of ground mustard, and 1 teaspoon of salt. Going to whisk these all together and set it aside. I'm also going to quickly slice up an onion. And now for the pork chops. Here I have 7 pork loin chops that I've seasoned with salt and pepper on both sides. I'm just going to sear them for about a minute or 2 on each side, and you want to make sure that your oil is nice and hot before you add them in. Now you can totally skip this step if you want. I've done it before. They will still taste good, but if you have the time, do this extra step. It will give your meat a lot more flavor, and it's well worth the extra effort in my opinion. The recipe also calls for thick cut pork chops. Mine are pretty thin, so I'm just going to make sure to adjust the cooking time accordingly. So once the pork chops are seared on each side, I'm going to take them out of my pan and set them aside. Then in the same pan, I'm going to add in my sliced onions, and I'm going to season them with some salt and pepper and let these cook down just a little bit. This is not part of the recipe. The only reason I chose to do this is because, like I said before, my pork chops are thinner, which means that the onions won't cook as long as they're supposed to, and I was afraid that they wouldn't have time to cook completely. This is also a great opportunity for me to season my onions and give this dish even more flavor. So I'm not cooking them all the way through. I still want them to have a little bite to it. Okay, so now I'm ready to add everything inside the slow cooker, starting with the pork chops. Now I'm adding in the sauce, and then I'll add the onions right on top. Then I'm going to cover it and cook it on low for 3 hours. Now, if you have thicker pork chops, the recipe says to cook it on low for 4 to 5 hours or on high for 2 to 3 hours. So it's only been 2.5 hours. I checked up on it. I used my meat thermometer and they are done and they are fork tender. What I decided to do was thicken up the sauce and make a gravy because I thought the sauce was just a little bit too thin. I added the sauce to a small saucepan, and to thicken it up, I'm adding a slurry, which is basically a mixture of cold water and cornstarch. Then I'm going to bring it to a boil and let it simmer for a couple of minutes until it thickens up, and that's it. As you can see, my sauce is now much thicker. These pork chops were amazing, and we devoured them. I just served them with some yummy mashed potatoes and some green beans. I also added some fresh parsley on top, and it was perfect. This is definitely going in our favorite recipe binder, and I will be making this again. This next recipe was very tasty and super easy to make. I am making some Italian meatball soup. To start off, I'm going to dice up some vegetables. For this recipe, you need 2 stalks of celery, 2 carrots, and 1 onion. Then I'm just going to go ahead and add this to my crock pot. Here I'm adding 1 package of frozen beef meatballs. This is a 24 ounce or 680 gram bag of meatballs. So I'm just going to add that in, and then I'm going to add some crushed tomatoes. The recipe actually calls for a 15 ounce can of crushed tomatoes. My can is double the size, so I'm only going to be using about half. Then I'm adding 1 can of tomato sauce, and then I'm going to add in my seasonings. Here I'm adding 2 teaspoons of Italian seasoning, 1 teaspoon of salt, and 1 teaspoon of pepper. Then the last thing to go in is 6 cups of beef broth. This is going to cook on low for 6 to 8 hours. It all depends on your crock pot. Some will cook faster than others, so be sure to keep an eye on it. Mine was done after 6 hours. So I have 30 minutes left of cooking time. So now I'm going to add in some pasta. This is d'Italy pasta. I'm pretty sure I'm saying that wrong, but this is what it looks like. I'm going to add 1.5 cups of this pasta, and I'm just going to give it a good stir. And then I'm going to put the cover back on, and I'm going to cook it for an additional 30 minutes. And this is what it looks like when it's all done. As you can see, this meal was super simple to make. The hardest part is chopping up the veggies, but you can always prep those the night before just to save up on time. I just added some fresh grated Parmesan cheese on top, as well as some chopped parsley, and this was really good. This had some really great flavor, and we really did enjoy this one. The last recipe I have for you this week are sweet and sour Smokies. So to start off, I'm cutting up 1 green bell pepper and 1 red pepper into about 1-inch pieces, and then I'm also going to cut up some Smokies. Now I'm just cutting up my Smokies, and I'm going to be using 5 for this recipe. Then in a bowl, I'm going to whisk together 1/4 cup of apricot jam with 3 tablespoons of soy sauce, 1 teaspoon of minced garlic, and 1/4 cup of vinegar. here I've added a 1/4 cup of chicken broth to a bowl, and to that I'm adding 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. Gonna give this a good whisk, and then I'm going to add it to my sauce, and this is supposed to thicken the sauce as it cooks. Now I'm going to add the sauce to my slow cooker, followed by my sausages and my peppers. Going to give this a quick toss till they are completely coated with the sauce, and then I'm going to add 1 can of pineapple chunks right on top. And I am loving how colorful this looks. So now I'm going to cover it and cook this on low for 4 to 6 hours, or you can cook it on high for 2 to 3 hours. So this was done after 4 hours, and this is what it looks like. We decided to serve this over rice. This would also be a great appetizer for a party. You could buy the little Smokies instead of slicing up the regular ones and then serve them on toothpicks. I thought this was really good, but I think I would personally like it better as an appetizer just because I found it to be a little too sweet for a full dinner. I also found the sauce to be too thin, despite the fact that I added a slurry. So if I were to serve this again as a meal, I would definitely transfer the sauce to a saucepan on the stove and thicken it up even more. So like I said, this tasted really good. It's just a little too sweet for me as a meal, but definitely something I would make as an appetizer. So that is it for this video. I hope you guys enjoyed making these crockpot meals with me. I hope you're all doing well. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you again in my next one. Bye guys.